All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating parts of your body, something I like to call the hidden command center, your adrenal glands. Now, these things are tiny, but don't let their size fool you. Their influence is absolutely massive. So let's get into it and figure out how they wield so much power.
I mean, you've felt that before, right? That sudden jolt of energy? Maybe you're startled by a loud noise, or you're nervous before a big presentation. All of a sudden, your heart's racing, your palms are sweaty, and you feel incredibly alert. Ever wonder what's actually going on inside your body to make that happen?
Well, believe it or not, that whole intense reaction is being directed by two tiny little glands. They're sitting right on top of your kidneys, acting like the master conductors of this wild biological orchestra.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll do a quick tour of these command centers. Then we'll break them down into their two main parts. The cortex, think of it as the day-to-day factory, and the medulla, which is your body's emergency responder. And finally, we'll look at what happens when things go a little haywire and that balance is lost.
All right, let's jump right in. First stop on our tour, getting to know these command centers. You know, where they live and what they're all about.
So if you look at your kidneys, these little glands sit right on top of them. The technical term is the cephalid portion, but really, it's simpler than that. Just picture them wearing little hats. And from that spot, their one and only job is to churn out hormones that are, and I mean this literally, vital for keeping you alive.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Each gland isn't just one thing. It's actually like two glands in one, all wrapped up together. You've got the outer layer, which we call the cortex, and then this inner core, the medulla. The best way to think about it is like an avocado. You've got the fleshy part and the pit. And the key thing to remember is that these two parts do totally different things. So let's start on the outside with the cortex.
Okay, part 2, the cortex. This is the essential factory. I want you to picture this outer layer as a busy, sophisticated factory that's humming along 24/7, making all the hormones you need just to get through a normal day.
And just like any good factory, this one has different departments or production lines. There are 3 big ones, and each is in charge of making a very specific group of hormones that handle, well, pretty much everything, from your energy levels to the salt and water balance in your body.
So, those 3 production lines are cranking out these guys. First, you've got glucocorticoids, which manage energy and inflammation. Then there are the mineralocorticoids, which are all about balancing salt and water. And finally, adrenal androgens, which are basically the starting materials for sex hormones. Let's take a closer look at what each of these actually does.
First up are the glucocorticoids. You've probably heard of the most famous one in this group, cortisol. Think of these as the body's managers. They're dialing down inflammation and telling your liver, hey, we need more energy, make some glucose. Cortisol is also the reason you feel awake and ready to go in the morning and kind of start winding down at night. It's a huge part of your daily rhythm.
Okay, next up, the mineralocorticoids. The main player here is aldosterone. If the glucocorticoids are the managers, these guys are the chemists. Their job is to keep your electrolytes perfectly balanced. They're constantly tweaking your body's salt and water levels by telling the kidneys, okay, keep the sodium, dump the potassium. It's this supercritical balancing act that keeps your blood pressure stable and your cells working right.
And last but not least, our third production line makes adrenal androgens. Now, these are a little different. Don't think of them as the final product. They're more like the raw materials, the basic building blocks. Their real magic happens after they leave the adrenal factory. They travel somewhere else in the body to get converted into other hormones, like testosterone. Okay, so that's the cortex, the factory that handles all the day-to-day stuff. But what about emergencies? For that, we have to go deeper, into the inner core. Welcome to part 3, the medulla, your body's first responder. And yep, this is where that jolt of energy we mentioned at the start comes from.
The medulla is responsible for probably the most famous reaction in all of biology. You know what I'm talking about, the fight or flight response. This is your body's ultimate, no-holds-barred survival mode. And it happens in a flash. It's like a lightning-fast chain reaction. Your brain senses danger, a signal zaps down to the medulla. The medulla instantly floods your system with a cocktail of hormones called catecholamines, but you know them as adrenaline and noradrenaline. That massive hormonal surge is what gets your body primed and ready for action right now.
So what does that feel like on the inside? Well, your heart starts hammering in your chest. Your airways open up so you can suck in more oxygen. Your body gets super smart and redirects blood flow. It pulls it away from stuff that doesn't matter right now, like digestion, and shunts it straight to your big muscles.
And then it hits the emergency power switch, rapidly breaking down stored sugars and fats for a massive instant energy boost. It's a complete system override, all for one thing: survival.
Okay, so we have the everyday factory and the emergency responder working in harmony. But what happens when that perfectly tuned system gets thrown off balance? Well, that brings us to our last section. What happens when things go wrong?
When it comes to adrenal problems, it usually boils down to two main scenarios. You have hypofunction, that's hypo as in too little, where the glands just aren't making enough hormones. And then you have hyperfunction, hyper for too much, where they're going into overdrive.
So with hypofunction, or adrenal deficiency, the factory's output from the cortex just drops. Now, this can happen for two reasons. It could be a primary problem, meaning the factory machinery itself is broken. Or it could be secondary. The factory is totally fine, but it's not getting any instructions, no work orders, from its boss, the pituitary gland.
Now, on the flip side, with hyperfunction, when the adrenals are overproducing, things get a little more complicated. The specific problem you end up with depends entirely on which production line in that factory has gone haywire and is making too much of its hormone.
So for instance, if you get way too much of those glucocorticoids, like cortisol, that leads to something called Cushing syndrome. If the aldosterone production line is out of control, you get hyperaldosteronism. And if there's an excess of androgens, it can result in adrenal virilism. See? Each hormone overload creates its own very distinct set of problems.
So when you put it all together, it's pretty incredible, right? From just quietly managing your energy day to day to screaming the alarm and prepping your entire body for a crisis, your adrenal glands are constantly working behind the scenes to keep everything in perfect balance.
And that really brings us to a final pretty important thought. You know, these glands are built to handle intense but short-term stress, a real fight or flight situation. But think about our world today, with the constant deadlines, the endless notifications, the 24/7 pressure. Our adrenal glands are working overtime all the time, which kind of leaves us with a big question to think about. In a world that's always on, how can we do a better job of supporting these absolutely vital command centers?